Hello and welcome to Comic Culture. I'm Terrence Dollard, a professor in the Department of Mass Communication at the University of North Carolina at Pembroke. My guest today is writer Meredith Finch. Meredith, welcome to Comic Culture.
Hi everybody, thanks for having me.
Now Meredith, you are a writer with a diverse portfolio. You've written some I guess, sci-fi horror books, you've written superheroics, and you've written an adaptation of a biblical story. So I'm wondering, as a writer, how do you kind of jump between those genres and, still have a good story to tell?
Ultimately, even though I've dabbled in a bunch of different genres, I think that what makes it easy is that the message that I'm trying to communicate in the majority of my stories remains pretty consistent, and the themes that I'm exploring remain fairly consistent. So from Wonder Woman to Rose to the Book of Ruth, there's this overarching idea of love and exploring the idea of love and how it is reflected by a superhero, by a young woman, by God. And in all of those stories, that I think they're all my ways of exploring my own experiences with love, either with my children or with friends or family or with God. So it's not as difficult as you might think to go between genres when those are just, they're parts of a costume. The character itself, or the essence of the story, the structure of the story is really, I think, the most difficult part.
It's interesting because we tend to think of a movie as the events rather than the way the events impact the lives of our characters. So when you're handed a character like, let's say, Wonder Woman, who is an icon, close to 80 years of publication history, what can you bring to that character that will let you find a story that's worth telling?
I think one of the ways in which I benefit from writing Wonder Woman is that there haven't been a lot of women who've actually written that character. So it was fairly easy for me to look at her and see everything that had happened to her, because I was coming on after Brian Azzarello's run. And at that point, he had made her, she wasn't just Wonder Woman and a member of the Justice League, she was also the God of War, and her mother had been turned to clay, so she was the de facto queen of the Amazons. And I just kept thinking about all these things that she had on her plate and how that was very reflective of my own life, being a mom and a comic book writer and a wife and a friend and all of the different hats I was wearing at the same time, and how conflicted and torn I felt, not ever being able to give any one aspect of my life as much as I felt like I should. So it was very easy to then translate that into our Wonder Woman run and how she would feel. Because even a superhero, there's a finite amount of time. She can't travel back and forth between time. How does she juggle not being, part with the Justice League if something bad is happening because she's on Themyscira dealing with a problem with the Amazon? So I feel very blessed and grateful that I got to write that character when I did, and at this point in my life that I was at, because I felt like I was able to really add something to her that not a lot of people had done, because sometimes she gets written a little, not as multifaceted as I think I was able to do with what I was able to do with the character.
It's true, too. I mean, a character like Wonder Woman has been around, like I say, close to 80 years. I don't think we can look back in the same way we can with Batman or Superman, where we can remember those iconic stories every year. I mean, maybe we'll recall some George Perez run or the one where she gives up her powers. So when you're taking that character and you're able to put your stamp on her, it's interesting because someone else wasn't able to do that. You were able to find a way to tell a compelling story for the character and also add in those other elements. So when you have a character like Wonder Woman and maybe the Justice League is needing her for something, are you working with the editor to this is the idea you have for the story, but the editor tells you, oh, we need to tie in with this other book. And does that change the course of how you're putting together your narrative?
When we were doing Wonder Woman, we were fairly autonomous. At the same time, Peter Tomasi was writing the Wonder Woman Superman story. And so I talked to Peter, but there wasn't a lot going on that within the DC universe that I had to reflect. We had a fair amount of just do what you want to do. If I had wanted to pull more of the DCU in, I could have, but again, I think they knew they were running the New 52 only for 52 issues. So, and then they were going back to then they had Rebirth. So because of that, I think we had a lot more freedom and autonomy to do what we wanted to do with the character and within the universe than maybe some other writers who'd written her at different times in her history.
Now, I do want to talk about the Book of Ruth, because that's something that you just come out with, and I found it to be a beautiful adaptation. And I think I had mentioned that I had started to read it, and I was planning on just, I'm going to read a couple of pages here and there, and I found myself a few hours later, or an hour later rather, at the end of the book. Before we get into that story, which is very interesting and compelling, I'm just wondering, how do you structure your day? Because I obviously was unable to be disciplined and only read a few pages. I know that being home during the pandemic, trying to find the time to do work is difficult. There's always something that kind of comes up and keeps you from focusing. So you're working from home. How do you kind of balance the schedule to make sure that you're able to get everything done and still have time to do everything else?
Right. It's actually virtually impossible for me to work at home during the pandemic, just because the kids are home all the time. And anybody who's written anything, I think from a science report to an essay for your English class, you need a certain amount of quiet and uninterrupted time to be able to just organize your thoughts and sit down. So I had some writing I had to do earlier this summer, and I ended up going out to my parents' place because they live about 10 minutes away, and they're up at their cottage in northern Ontario. So I had some peace and quiet for 2 days, which gave me the time to sort of, get into that writing mindset, do the research and the introspection that I needed to do, and then that was the first day, and then the second day was actually productive writing. So it's certainly been a challenge. I'm lucky I don't really need to get a lot of writing work done right now. Sort of gearing up mentally once the kids go back to school to get back and start working on some new projects.
Now, with the Book of Ruth, this was a project that you crowdfunded to get copies into people's hands, and now people can go to their local comic shop or on Amazon perhaps and order a copy of this. But this is a whole different skill set than coming up with a great idea and writing it down. So how do you sort of, I don't know if it's a learning curve or what, for you to figure out the effective ways to crowdsource and then go through all the steps of publication?
I had a lot of help from just people I know within the community who've previously crowdsourced, and I could ask, questions of them. And I mean, there's a certain amount of research you just have to do on your own. Go on Kickstarter, look at the kind of tiers that people are offering, the kind of rewards people are offering, and then figure out how you can structure your own tiers and rewards. I think ultimately, for me, certainly the hardest part of Kickstarter has been the fulfillment, because the original goal prior to the pandemic was that Colin and I would both fly to Tennessee on one weekend, and while he was doing all those sketches, I would do all the mailing and label preparation and organization, and then 90% of the books would get shipped out that weekend. Then COVID-19 hit, and the hardcovers weren't being printed, and then the borders were closed, and here we are, the almost the end of August, and I still haven't been able to go and see the books in person beyond the copies that have been mailed to me for David to do sketches in, or for me to give to, I've got a few copies I've been able to give my parents and my sister, because of course they supported the Kickstarter too. So I guess, kickstarting in a pandemic, not ideal. Or fulfillment in a pandemic, not ideal. But I would certainly do the Kickstarter again. I think the lesson that I learned from it is, even though it seemed like it would be easier to send everything to the States, being in Canada, from a shipping cost of shipping point of view, I would never do that again, just in the chance that I wouldn't be able to do this. Now, again, I've been very blessed that I have a beautiful young woman who's helping me do all the fulfillment. And she's been fantastic, and I owe her a huge debt. And also all the people who supported the Kickstarter have been incredibly patient and understanding. the challenges we've had trying to get the rewards fulfilled. So it, it was fabulous. I loved it, but oh my goodness.
It is amazing when life throws a curve, in this case, a global pandemic that kind of takes us out of our normal routine. And I was going to say, I was very proud to be one of the supporters for the Kickstarter campaign. And one of the things that I noticed about this campaign was that you were very good at communicating what was happening. Folks, there's this part, there's that part, just be patient. And you were, so this is another thing that you have to add to your day. So when it comes, to this new secondary part of your job that you're doing, how often are you thinking to yourself, I've got to get something to these folks so that they know, we're on top of everything?
Every single day right now. I'm like, I really need to get, because I just found out, I'm sitting here thinking, I haven't had time yet today, but I'm thinking I need to get another update out because books that I thought had shipped for additional sketches and remarks didn't get shipped when I thought they got shipped. So now they're a month behind, and I think people are expecting stuff and they're not getting stuff. So it's always on my mind. It's always something that I'm thinking about. And I wish that we could have fulfilled the Kickstarter in a much more timely manner. The goal was ultimately that people would have their books before they hit the comic book store. I don't know that's necessarily going to happen for some of the people who in the higher tiers that required a signature, or not a signature, but like a remark or an artist sketch.
It's funny too, because I had selected the Lee Weeks variant cover. I'm a huge fan of Lee's work, and it was just a great way for me to put together an interesting book that I thought would be a great read with an interesting cover. So when you're dealing with the other people who are not part of this project, how difficult is it, how easy is it for you to reach out and say, hey, Lee, would you be interested in a cover? Or any of the other folks who are involved in some of this other variant work?
It was very, very mindful of the people that I approached for this project. So for example, we know Jason quite well. Jason is local. So it was very easy to, have him over for dinner and talk to him and say, hey, would you mind doing this? Billy Tucci and Lee I know through comic book conventions and we're good friends. And so I was able to just approach both of them at a convention and say, this is what I'm doing. Would you be interested? And I gave both of them the script. So they knew exactly what it was that they're putting their artwork on, because I think, especially when you're doing books about faith or faith-based characters, people want to know that the project that they're putting their artwork on or their name to is a respectful reflection of their own beliefs. And I didn't want to approach anybody without them having the opportunity to read the script, know what the artwork was going to look like and what the story was going to be, so that they could be comfortable with what they're putting their name and their artwork on. Because it's a bit of a, there's an understanding of somebody with a Kickstarter book like this, you're supporting that Kickstarter with your artwork, so you're giving it your approval. And
it's interesting too, because this is, the approach that you've taken with the Book of Ruth is unique. I mean, you're taking a story from the Bible and you are adapting it for a contemporary audience, and you're also setting it in, I guess would be sort of the early part of the 1900s, the Great Depression.
The Great Depression era, yes.
So how do you kind of look at one story and then convert it into the story that you want to tell and still have it be true to both visions?
For me, it was certainly just taking time to dive into the story of Ruth and understand the nuances of that story, the idea of that the whole point of the 4 chapters and the story is that she's moving Naomi, because the story is really, even though it's called the Book of Ruth, the story is Naomi's story, how Naomi comes from a place of plenty to a place of poverty, back to a place of plenty, back to a place of poverty, and then it's ultimately Ruth and Boaz who restore that plentifulness for her. And when I thought about doing that story, I don't know, I don't want to say I was divinely inspired, but it just made so much sense when I think about history. Where is a time in history that people can relate to where a similar thing occurred? And instantly I thought about the Depression, because it was such a dramatic change when that stock market crashed, and people lost everything. Families were broken apart. People committed suicide. Like, it was just short of what we're going through right now. It's hard to think of a time in American history that hit America more in its heart, because it wasn't a war in a faraway country. It was happening right here at home, and it was dramatically impacting everybody. So it just made a lot of sense to me to do that, and it worked out that, just before the Depression, Texas had the Dust Bowl, and that was a time that, again, a lot of people suffered and lost a lot of things. So I did a lot of praying for that book, and I like to think that maybe there was some inspiration to help me work that into a way that made sense. And I felt like it came together very seamlessly for me. And throughout the whole process, I did consult back and forth with my priest, and just to make sure that the changes I was making were still in line with the important parts of the story itself. Like the covering of Ruth by Boaz with his coat. In the original story, he covers her with a blanket and she sleeps at his feet. Well, I couldn't really do that. It doesn't make sense from a 1900s point of view. So, but the important part of that was the covering, him placing that covering over top of her. So ways that I could tweak the story, bring it into a slightly more modern, well, significantly more modern context, but still, and still have those important aspects that were significant to the original narrative.
And it's interesting too, because I think you found a way to connect the reader to the story in a way that perhaps wouldn't be quite as clear without it being sort of in this contemporary setting, even though it's, I guess almost 100 years back from our times. And one of the things that's really striking about the book is that it's done in black and white or in shades of gray. And I'm wondering, is this something that you always envisioned in your mind, or is this something that your artistic partner was coming up with?
When I first thought about doing the book, I thought it was going to be in color. And my original plan had been actually to do the first chapter in black and white, and then slowly add color to the book so that the last chapter would be in full color, just to show this transition. But I loved Colin's black and white artwork so much that ultimately what I did was, as we were going through, I just felt like there's one place in the story, excuse me, where I could really add a little color and have it much more meaningful, and also hint at, what this line is the beginning of. And so that's why we did the red scarf. And that was the only point of red in the story.
And it's interesting too, because I guess if we look back at films and newsreels from that time, easy for me to say, it's all stark black and white images, because obviously we weren't quite at the point of color film yet. And I think because it is your use of color is so laser focused, it does really grab the eye that way. Another thing that struck me was a lot of the locations seemed correct. And I'm wondering if this is something that you are going back and doing copious amounts of research, or Colin's doing the research on to make it correct. I mean, fashion, the way the cars look, everything along those lines. So I'm wondering, artistically, yes, I need to get a reference photo to draw the car the right way. But are you looking at the news of the day to try and make a reference that would be correct?
I did look back in terms of finding places. So because Ruth is in Bethlehem in the Old Testament, I wanted to see, is there a place that in America named Bethlehem where I could put this story and have it be an accurate reflection of what I'm trying to do. And it worked out that there is, in fact, a Bethlehem, Texas. So, and that Texas was part of the Dust Bowl. And I was, again, sometimes I think things work out the way they're meant to. In terms of the fashion and the cars and the settings, I give all of the credit to Colin for that. I give him a setting, and then I'm a firm believer that you hire the very best people for the job, and then you get out of their way because you hired them to do the job. And Colin is diligent to the extreme about wanting things to be authentic and reflective of everything. And so he put an incredible amount of effort and research into making sure that that book really was reflective of the times. And he would send me and I included a few of them in the book, sketches of characters and fashions, like, what about this for Ruth's dress or Naomi's dress? And so I had a lot of different options to choose from, but the only one that I would say, like, that I had any kind of input was on the dress that Naomi had made for Ruth out of her own dress. That one I had something more specific, so I gave him some examples of what I wanted it to look like.
Well, I see we have about 3 minutes left in our conversation, and I'd be remiss if I didn't point out that you are married to David Finch, who is another comics professional. I'm just wondering, is it difficult? You're both, I guess, sort of in the freelance community. First off, you're working from home. I'm assuming he's working from home as well. Staying out of each other's way when you've got deadlines, but also making sure that there's always a job on the horizon. So how do you kind of work that out?
Yeah, we very much have delineated our workspaces. So he works in the basement and I work upstairs. And we've tried him working upstairs. We've tried him working on the main floor. He likes the basement and being as far away from the front door as possible. So that works out really well. And because when I met David, he was already in the industry and I was not, it was very easy to just give him his work day. Like he would get up with us and the kids in the morning, we would have breakfast, the kids would go to school, and then, we might go for a walk or to the gym, and then he goes to work. The one thing about both of us working from home in the creative industry is that holidays don't exist the way that they would for a person who works a 9-to-5 job. You don't ever take a 1-week vacation or a week off for Christmas. I can't remember Christmas where Dave hasn't gone down and worked because he had deadlines. Or I think we've taken one vacation in the 15 years we've been together where he didn't bring work with him, because work for him is not just about the deadline, but it's also a release of anxiety. And that's one of the things that somebody who works in the creative field, part of what you're doing is expressing your stresses and your joys and your experiences in your life as part of your work. It's part of the way in which you externalize the feelings that you might otherwise hold internally and that other people might just deal with internally. So we've been able to find a really great balance. And I try to help him when I can, scanning pages, answering emails. He is always my very first editor. Nobody sees anything I've written before David has a chance to go through it and say yes or no. So I feel very blessed that we work together as well as we do, and we complement each other as well as we do. Our strengths and our weaknesses are very well balanced.
Well, Meredith, they're telling me that we have indeed run out of time. I'd like to thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day to talk with me today. I'd like to thank you at home for watching Comic Culture. We will see you again soon. Comic Culture is a production of the Department of Mass Communication at the University of North Carolina at Pembroke.
My grandparents and my parents taught me and my siblings at a very early age that we did not have to travel outside of Robeson County to get a great education, and they were right.
Academics was a really big topic. It was always pushed, it was always encouraged to continue to advance ourselves.
UNCP is in my blood with my family, strong family ties there, and it will always be a part of who I am, and it's just a very inviting campus.
The classes are small enough that it's not a huge jump for me from high school to college. It was a nice kind of transition into that university setting.
The staff and employees were very welcoming, and I think that's essential when you're transitioning from living at home with your parents and everything being very straightforward to going to college where you had a lot of independence.
Having responsibilities that I didn't have before, before I was in school, kind of set me up to be the professional and the adult I am today. What do you want to do? How do you want to get there? UNC Pembroke is where you should start at immediately.